Hey there everyone, welcome back to Utility Sports. Really excited for today's video as we discuss a team that has been kind of a topic of discussion here on the channel and one that I've had a lot of intrigue in when it comes to the direction this franchise is about to take, and that is the Washington Wizards. And I think that they could potentially be headed toward a rebuild, and I think Wizards fans would rejoice if that was the case. So Wizards fans, let me know down in the comments section the direction you want this franchise to take. We're going to break down some options and what I think the realistic pathway is for this team and kind of what has all started this change of direction for the organization. I'm very excited for this video. I hope you all are as well. If you do end up enjoying the content you see in this video, please make sure to leave a like, subscribe to the channel for more content like what you see here. Hit that notification bell so you don't miss out on any future Utility Sports uploads. And let's jump into it here with the video preview. And what are we going to explicitly talk about in this video? First of all, we're going to talk about Ted Leonsis, the owner of the Washington Wizards. He was just recently on the Woj pod with Adrian Wojnarowski of ESPN. I did give that episode a listen. I would recommend going and checking that out after this video. Then we'll also talk about Michael Winger, who is also on that episode and has had a presser too that I think gave us some insight to some of the things that we could look to see Washington do this offseason. Then we'll talk about their quote-unquote big three of Bradley Beal, Kristaps, Porzingis, and Kyle Kuzma. We'll look at their contract situations, and then we'll also look at maybe what's the best movement opportunities for Washington this offseason. We'll then consider pick number 8, which is their first selection in this year's draft, and really a pivotal one for the future of this franchise, just with where they're currently at, and their young supporting cast. 2 players specifically that I do like long-term for them. I didn't include Daniel Gafford in that segment of the video, although I do think he has a role in this league. I wanted to focus on 2 different guys in this video that I think are maybe false ceiling players or have kind of a higher impact on the long-term future of this franchise than what people would currently consider them to have. So let's jump into the owner and the brand new president of basketball operations, Michael Winger. Let's start with Ted Leonsis, though. He was on the Woj pod, and I think really important from there is he multiple times stated that he wasn't happy with the direction of the Washington Wizards and didn't really see them having an authentic chance to win a championship, and ultimately just felt like he was doing the fans a disservice.
I'm the main owner. I have to report to the fans. And our fans have been loyal. Our business is good. We're one of the largest, in terms of revenue, sports organizations on the planet. But I don't feel like I was giving the fans something to fall in love with, to cheer for authentically. We weren't giving them hope and promise.
Now, I know Wizards fans might roll their eyes at that. There was an incident a little while ago where Ted Leonsis was actually blocking fans on Twitter. So, you know, he said he has to report to the fans, but he's had experience and history of doing other things. So take it as you will. Maybe it's a little bit of face saving on a public podcast like Adrian Wojnarowski's is. But nonetheless, Ted Leonsis, he's backed up some of those thoughts with actual actions by firing Tommy Shepard out of the role that Michael Winger is now in. And I think it is a really good move for the organization. Michael Winger comes from the Los Angeles Clippers organization, where he's found a lot of success. Also was previously with the Oklahoma City Thunder. I think he's a really smart guy. I think he definitely understands what it takes to build a good, winning, competitive team. And now I think he's got some really tough challenges ahead of him. But really, at the end of the day, Ted Leonsis referred back to kind of the core he had of Gilbert Arenas, Anton Jamison, and said, look, that wasn't good enough. We didn't get to where we wanted to go, and we traded off of that. We started to rebuild through draft picks, and then he referenced landing John Wall in D.C.
I initially came in and made the decision that we should try to rebuild the team through the draft. And I worked with the then president, general manager, Ernie Grunfeld, and asked if he was up to that task. And we had 3 players who had been all-stars, if you will, and Caron Butler and Gilbert Arenas and Antoine Jamison, and we traded all of them. The team was not very good by design, and we won the first pick in the draft. John Wall was the consensus #1 pick.
And him just simply bringing that up on his own accord makes me believe that the Wizards are going to look to rebuild this thing through the draft again. And Michael Winger was actually explicitly asked do you have authority and autonomy to actually go into a rebuild? And Michael Winger pointedly said, yes, I do have authority to do that. And I think the fact that not only he was so quick to answer that, but also so pointed towards, yes, I have that authority, means that that's probably the page that both Ted Leonsis and Michael Winger are on. They've definitely discussed it. I think it was an important piece of Michael Winger landing the job was the discussion on rebuilding this team and what to do. And I think Michael Winger's been very clear that, look, this team's not good enough. They're not getting the job done. He even said something to the effect on the radio of, look, we've seen what this team is and what the results produce, and they're not good enough. Kyle Kuzma followed that up with a very interesting tweet of his own, basically implying, my time in Washington might be over, to that effect at least. So I think it's going to be a really good management change, because I think the Wizards do need this type of overhaul. Otherwise, you're kind of chasing the middle, and that's exactly where you do not want to be in the NBA, of a team that maybe you get into the playoffs, but if you do, you probably lose in 4 or 5 games in the first round, and most of the time you don't even. And for the Wizards, they've only made the playoffs once in the last 5 years. So I think it's really important for this team and this organization to start that new direction, and I think that's exactly what they're doing, which ushers us here into the conversation on the big three: Bradley Beal, Kristaps Porzingis, and Kyle Kuzma. Kuzma has a player option this year for $13 million. That will be declined. There is zero chance he opts into that. So you can essentially look at him as an unrestricted free agent. Kristaps Porzingis has a player option at $36 million, which is significantly higher. Something I think Kristaps Porzingis could maybe consider opting into, because it is a pretty large number, but he is coming off a very good year where he was super impactful defensively. Was really good in his points per possession per touch, which I think is something that most teams do monitor very closely. I think he's actually really built up his stock. He played about 65 games, was very available for Washington, and I think had a really good season, one of the more underrated seasons in the league. Not a lot of buzz coming out of mainstream media around Kristaps Porzingis this year. I honestly don't know if they watch Wizards games or not, but he was really good for them this year. Bradley Beal, of course, the last couple of years been a little bit more injury prone, missed a significant amount of time, and I think with him missing time, this team was also just significantly worse. I think that there is direct correlation to that. But if you look at Bradley Beal's contract, and I think this is the real issue, right now I see people like floating trades to me of Bradley Beal getting traded for pick number 3 or pick number 2 or some crazy high amount of assets. This contract is terrible, really terrible. He has a player option going into 2027 for $57 million. He's currently 30 years old. He'll be a 34, 35-ish year old player making nearly $60 million, and his team's missing the playoffs while he's 30. I just don't think that this is a good contract at all. I think the Wizards are likely stuck with it, which kind of turns me to the direction that now Michael Winger has to make some tough decisions within the first couple weeks of being on the job. Once free agency gets around here, it's like he's got a bunch of options that he's got to decide between. And those options are exploring sign and trades for both Kyle Kuzma and Kristaps Porzingis, which sometimes can be difficult to actually pull off because there is a significant amount of teams with cap space this offseason. You could look at Houston as a team with cap space. San Antonio has cap space. Orlando has cap space. There's other teams as well throughout the league that can operate with cap space this offseason, and there might even be a couple of surprise teams that kind of fluctuate into that category as well. Maybe a team like Philadelphia, if they're able to find a suitor for Tobias Harris via trade. I know the Oklahoma City Thunder have cap space. I don't think that they're really a risk to steal Kuzma or Porzingis, but you never know, right? And those are some of the things Washington has to weigh, is what's the likelihood we lose these guys for nothing? Because I do think it's a significant risk this offseason, but really the best case scenario is Michael Winger going to Kuzma and Porzingis privately and saying, look, we want you guys to get paid. Just right now with the direction of our franchise, it doesn't make sense for it to be here, but we would love to help facilitate that. We would love to get you where you want to go, to a team that's competitive and can win. We can put you back into the playoffs, put you on a kind of a scene or a stage to perform at the highest level while getting your bag. And I think that's a really important note, that the Wizards can help them get to a team that doesn't have cap space. So you think about the teams I haven't mentioned so far. Like if Kuzma really wants to go back to the Lakers, though, the Wizards could theoretically help get him there, whether that's a sign and trade for D'Angelo Russell. Of course, you could include the contracts of Malik Beasley and Mo Bamba. That's about $26 million. So you could get Kuzma a pretty significant contract. And the Lakers wouldn't really have to give up too much out of their current rotation between Beasley and Bamba. So I think there are ways to get players where they want to go. And I think it's going to be imperative that the Wizards help find those opportunities so that they get assets back in the door in those sign-in trades. Kristaps, I don't really have a great idea of where he's going to land at this point. Kuzma, of course, I think the Lakers are a team that makes sense, but also the Grizzlies, I think, would be a team you could consider as an option. There's a few teams that are going to be suitors for both of these guys. I just don't have a great real indication yet as to where they're going to land. We're still a month and a half away from free agency, or not a month and a half, excuse me, half a month away from free agency. So we've got some time to get there, and I think we're going to get more intel, more information in the next couple of weeks, so it's definitely something to stay tuned for. But then the other option for them, outside of just sign-in trades for Kuzma and Porzingis, is really praying for a trade partner for Bradley Beal. And I think that this needs to be a situation where a team is so desperate to win, like the Dallas Mavericks, for example, that maybe, just maybe, you can turn Bradley Beal into an asset, because even though Bradley Beal's a good player, you might have to trade him for pennies on the dollar to avoid the long-term financial burdens of his contract. If you think about a Washington Wizards rebuild, Beal can stay. It's not the end of the world, because he's not going to help this team win like to a level where they're going to be like a brisk playoff team or a fringe playoff team, but like it doesn't help you lose. And the issue with it is you're paying him so much that if you do want to take a swing on a guy in free agency over the next couple of years, you really don't have that option because of how much Beal is making. And then secondly, one thing I do want to say though too is with Beal, like his contract, at the end of the day, the Wizards, if they're not planning on paying anybody and they're going to kind of strip this thing back down, they can hold on to Beal for the next 3-4 years because it doesn't really hurt them that badly either. Because like I said, they're not going to win a crazy amount with Beal on the roster, especially if they do strip the whole thing down around him. The team would be kind of bare bones. And then Beal does have a no trade clause, so it's going to be hard for Washington to work out one of those trades. So it's really going to come down to, they tell Beal, look, we want to get you somewhere you can win, because it's not going to be here over the next few years. And I think that's going to be a difficult discussion. They're not going to get a ton of value if teams are valuing Beal properly just because of his contract. But I do think that worst case scenario, if they keep him the entire duration, it's not the end of the world. It's not, but I think it would be obviously preferred that they could get something for him and just kind of reset the entire thing, bottom out, and get back to potentially the number one pick when they drafted John Wall over a decade ago. I think that would be really good for this organization to have an opportunity at the number one overall pick again, even in 2024, where it's a thinner class, maybe not as much top end talent as we see this year. Having the number one pick is still better than any other selection in the draft. That's just the reality of the situation. And I think that there's a bunch of different players that could really help them out in next year's draft. A guy like Matas Buzelis comes to mind with a really good fit with some of their other pieces. And I think that, for me, honestly, right now, I think they should be considered the odds-on favorite to be the worst team in the NBA next year, just because their roster is about to get stripped down, I believe, pretty thoroughly. So pick number 8, let's talk about that selection that they have this year and some of their options. Of course, you think about some of the typical options you'd consider: Ausar Thompson, Anthony Black. Now I do want to float potentially Amen Thompson. And is there a pathway that Washington could maybe move up in the draft to go get him, say at 4th overall? Is that a possibility? I don't think it's very likely. And I think if you're Washington, the last thing you want to do in a rebuilding situation is trade future assets to move up to go get a guy right now. But if there is a guy that's worth doing that for, obviously, Victor Wembanyama, Scoot Henderson, those two guys are obvious. But Amen Thompson, in terms of the potential that he possesses with his frame at 6'7", his arms are extremely long. He's got a great wingspan for a guard. He's quick, explosive, jumps out of the gym. And I think his skill set as a finisher and a facilitator is really, really tough to match in this class. Scoot Henderson's a fantastic passer as well, but I think Amen Thompson at the end of the day might end up being the best passer in this class. And that could give you the structural piece that you need to build your team around if you're Washington for the long term. And it would also help you kind of still lose now. Amen Thompson, I don't think is ready to be a number one player on a team, but that's kind of the role he'd probably be thrust into in Washington, which is good. It would be good for his development, but it wouldn't be good for winning right away, which is perfectly A-okay with Washington. But realistically, let's say they don't trade up. Thompson, his twin brother, someone who could become a very good point of attack defender and just an overall sneaky player in general with his ability to knock down open shots off the catch and shoot. People like to reference the shooting numbers. Look, Thompson played way more with the ball in his hands. Therefore, his shots are a little bit more difficult than Thompson, who had more catch and shoot opportunities, more spot up opportunities, more lobs thrown to him this past year than Thompson had. So be careful referencing the field goal percentage and the 3-point percentage. I don't think it's fully indicative of the two players' talent level. And then Anthony Black, not really a high ceiling guy in a lot of people's minds, but for me, he's a guy that if they drafted him, I would say, hey, look, that's a staple of the franchise, someone you could see being there for the next 9 to 10 years. And that's something Washington kind of lacks right now currently too. I know Beal spent such a long time there, but otherwise it's been kind of a huge revolving door of players that have come in and out of the organization. And I think that is a challenge for the team. How do they look to build something that's not just looking for the next 3-4 years? How do they build a picture that they want something like what Golden State or Denver's had, where they've been very patient and they've kind of stuck with the same core, the same meaningful players year in, year out? I think that's what the Wizards want to emulate. Now, it's very difficult to do, but we'll see if they can do it. And I think Anthony Black is a good starting point for that if that's who they decide to draft on draft night this year. So going into that young core, and there's two young talented players that I do like quite a bit, and it is Corey Kispert and Deni Avdija. And I know that might be a little surprising to people why I'm talking specifically about these two guys, but I think that there is significant value that these two players can bring to a franchise. And I think out of everyone on the roster, I like Daniel Gafford, but I think out of everyone on the roster, outside of, Beal, Kuzma, Porzingis, who are of course that quote unquote big three, these are the two players that make the most sense to stay in Washington long term. Kispert is a player that every single team in the league would love to have. That was a huge part of my draft evaluation on him is, look, maybe the ceiling isn't a 20-point per game scorer, but it's a guy who can fit into any lineup. He brings a lot of offensive versatility. He's actually surprisingly good in transition. I think he's just overall a great shot maker. In fact, he finished top 5 in the league in shot making quality, which is very impressive. He was surrounded by guys like Devin Booker and Kevin Durant. Now, is that something that you would bet on year in, year out? Maybe not, but I think the one thing about it is he's just very good at putting the ball in the basket. Now, he doesn't do it the same way that those others do it, which is very impressive for them. You think about, Booker and Durant and some of those other high-end isolation players. They take more difficult shots, heavier contested shots, but Kispert pays off a good amount of his looks, and that's really important for the Wizards going forward. Is how do you surround, like, say, a guy like Thompson or Anthony Black or Thompson, and it's with guys who can pay off opportunities, and that's exactly what Corey Kispert does. And then Deni Avdija, I think, while they're retooling and reshaping this team, I think he's a player I would give significantly more usage to see if we can unlock some of his capabilities that he showed for Maccabi Tel Aviv before coming into his own draft, where he was kind of a point forward, handled the ball, pushed in transition, and got guys the rock in a variety of ways. He's at 6'9", he's got good length and size to him, and I think defensively he's been a really good player so far in his career. I think one of the more underrated players around the league because Washington doesn't get that much love. I think Kispert and Deni Avdija are two, not cornerstones, but building blocks for this team. Two guys that I could see being good long-term fits with whoever they end up drafting because they have skills that translate. Kispert's main one, shooting. I think for Deni, you're looking at defense and ball skills, ability to push and handle the ball. He can run a pick and roll for you. There's a lot of things that both of these guys offer, and I think that they fit off of each other too. So for me, if I'm Washington, yes, it's not going to translate to a lot of wins if Deni Avdija, Corey Kispert, and whoever they select at pick 8 are your 3 or 4 best players. But it does give them pathways to work on their games in higher usage. And then down the road, when you kind of shuffle in some more top picks and you kind of reshuffle this whole thing into a team that makes sense, these guys are going to have more developed skills, and you're going to put them back into reduced roles where they're going to be able to really shine because they're not getting asked to do too much, but they have the experience of doing a lot. And I think that would be really good for both Kispert and Avdija's long-term development, which I think has been an issue in Washington so far as they've been trying to be competitive. So they have all these players like Kuzma, Porzingis, and Beal who kind of dominate the ball in different ways. Not that they're ball hogs or anything, but they the ball naturally finds them more in their half-court offense. And I think Kispert and Avdija are guys who could take advantage of more opportunities and really set themselves up for success long term, even if that means 4 or 5 years down the line. Wizards fans, like I'm sure you're excited for a rebuild. Just know it's not going to be a 1 year or 2 year thing. It's going to be a 3, 4, 5 year process, but it's one that's definitely worth doing if you're Washington, because right now this team's just not flat out good enough to get where Washington Wizards fans really want this team to get to. Thank you all so much for watching. I hope you really did enjoy this video. I had a lot of fun talking about the Wizards. I do think that this is good for their long-term direction if Michael Winger does in fact kind of tear this whole thing down and start from scratch with the team. Keep some of the young pieces that can fit long-term. You've got some assets to work with after the Rui Hachimura trade. A few second-round picks came in the door there. So Michael Winger's got options. We'll see what he looks to do with them. But I think that realistically should start with navigating sign-in trades for both Kuzma and Porzingis, and from there we can kind of re-see where this team's at and re-examine what their next step is. But I think, start with Porzingis, Kuzma, go on to Beal and see what you can do from there. I hope you guys did enjoy. If you did, leave a like, subscribe to the channel for more, and we'll catch you in the very next Utility Sports video.